His last wish before execution was to see his dog. What happened next changed everything. By dawn, the prison felt heavier, as if the concrete itself had learned to hold its breath. Keys clicked too loud. Radios whispered instead of spoke. In cell D14, Eli Navarro sat on the edge of a narrow cot, elbows on his knees, staring at a scuff on the floor he'd memorized years ago. The clock above the bars didn't tick. It pulsed. He wasn't who he had been when he came in. Hot-headed, loud, quick to swing. 7 years and 100 quiet midnights had sanded him down into something else. His hands had stopped shaking months ago. Only his eyes still moved too fast, like they were always trying to outrun the memory of a corner store with a flickering sign. A gun someone else fired, and his name at the bottom of a verdict he couldn't outshout. The warden asked for his last request. They always did. Some men asked for fried chicken or strawberry pie, music from when they were kids, a pastor with a gentle voice. Eli lifted his head, and when he spoke, it came out steady. "I want to see Coda." A couple of officers blinked. One of them, Sergeant Lena Morales, the only one who ever said good morning like she meant it, didn't blink at all. "Coda?" the warden repeated. "My dog." Silence slid into the room and took a chair. The warden, Addison, a neat man with neat shoes, folded his fingers. "We've never brought an animal into the yard for this." He didn't finish the sentence. Morales cleared her throat. "He hasn't had a visitor in 3 years, sir. No calls, no mail. Coda's the only family in his file." Addison studied Eli's record. 7 years clean, a handful of inmate work commendations, no fights, not a single write-up after the first winter. He closed the folder with a careful thumb. 10 minutes, he said at last. Yard only. Restraints stay. Sergeant Morales, you supervise word traveled faster than coffee. By 8, an animal control van had rattled through the outer gate. Eli stood in the yard, cuffs loose at the front. The sky a flat winter sheet above him. A metal chair faced the gate. He didn't sit. The hinges complained. A German shepherd stepped into the light. Grey dusted the edges of his muzzle now, but the rest, the high ear tilt, the soldier's posture, was the same. For one heartbeat, the world had no fences. "Coda," Eli breathed. The leash eased. Coda surged forward, then slammed into Eli's chest hard enough to steal breath. Eli dropped to his knees. Fur and salt and the smell of rain, even though it hadn't rained. Coda whined, a thin, breaking sound, and shoved his head beneath Eli's chin like he was trying to crawl back inside the past and drag something good out with his teeth. For a moment, there was no yard, no tower, no clock. Just a man, and the only creature who had never asked him to be anything but himself. Then, Coda went still. The change wasn't loud. It was a switch flipped behind the eyes. Muscles hardened. Tail froze, mid-sweep. A sound began in the dog's chest, low, ancient. Eli felt it through the fabric before he heard it. Coda wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at a man across the yard, Lieutenant Reed Sutter, tall and precise, the kind of officer whose uniform looked ironed even after a 12-hour shift. Hands behind his back, eyes unreadable. He'd transferred in 2 years earlier and made a reputation for never raising his voice. Coda's lips peeled back a fraction. Not a show, not theater, a warning he meant. "Control your dog," Sutter said without looking directly at them. Eli's hand slid to Coda's shoulder. "Easy, boy." He felt the tremor under the fur, the coiled spring barely held. Coda's stare didn't break. Morales angled closer to the lieutenant. "You allergic?" she said lightly. "No." Sutter's jaw clicked. The scar on the web of his right hand, thin, crescent-shaped, pale as chalk, caught the pale morning. Eli hadn't seen it before. Coda had. The air changed temperature. Morales noticed the scar too. Her eyes flicked to Eli, then to the dog, then back to Sutter. "You're bleeding," she said, though he wasn't. It was just a sentence to place on the table and see who picked it up. Sutter didn't. The 10 minutes stretched and snapped. When Morales finally tugged Eli's sleeve, Coda didn't want to leave the yard. He planted his feet and stared after Sutter until the gate swallowed the man whole. In the control room, the warden waited. "Well?" Morales told him everything, but left out how her hands had gone cold when she saw the scar. Addison pinched the bridge of his nose. "Coincidence," he said, before admitting it tasted wrong. "Sir, the store report mentioned a bite wound on the perpetrator's right hand. The DA's office never found the dog." The note got buried under a pile of overwhelming evidence. Addison stared at her. "Find me the file." They found a box, in storage, misshelved, tape slashed and retaped twice. On the inventory, surveillance disc damaged, Clark's shirt, blood, torn jacket sleeve, unknown, chain of custody, Lieutenant R. Sutter. The signature dated the night Eli was arrested. No one had noticed that Sutter shouldn't have signed anything. He hadn't been assigned to the case then. He'd been on scene as a neighboring precinct observer. The warden made a call that tasted like metal. Within an hour, the state's attorney was in his office, jaw tight, tie pulled loose a half-inch. "You understand what you're implying," he said. "I'm implying we slow down," Addison replied, and signed the stay order with a hand he tried to keep from shaking. They brought Eli to a small room with a table too big for the space. Coda lay under it, head on Eli's boot, eyes on the door. Morales stood by the wall, arms folded, looking at no one and everyone. Sutter came in last, expression pinned into something neutral. "Lieutenant," Addison said, his voice made of glass, "why was your name on the chain of custody the night of Navarro's arrest?" Sutter didn't blink. "Short staff. I was asked to assist. By whom?" Silence. A muscle ticked under Sutter's eye. The state's attorney set a photo on the table. Frame grabbed from a damaged camera, cleaned up as much as a night shift technician could manage. A forearm in motion, a mouth open, teeth buried in the flesh at the thumb's base. The outline was crude. The shape was not. "We're going to need a swab," the attorney said, "and your jacket from that month, and a clear explanation." Sutter laughed once, a sound you make when you walk into a room you thought was yours and find all the furniture has been moved. "On the advice of counsel," he began, but it was already too late. Coda had already stood without a word from Eli. He didn't growl. He looked at Sutter the way a compass looks at north. The lab work didn't take long. New tech, old evidence, a system embarrassed into moving fast. The dog DNA on the torn sleeve matched Coda's bite pattern, unique as a fingerprint. The human DNA, faint, old, stubborn, matched Reed Sutter down to the decimal points. Cross-checks crawled out of old corners. A payday loan in Sutter's brother's name. The clerk's testimony changed under pressure. A witness recanting once he was told he wouldn't be charged for lying anymore. Sutter didn't run. He went quiet instead, which is how some men fall apart. The confession came in pieces, in the rattle of a heating vent, in the way he wouldn't look at Eli. He'd owed someone more dangerous than the job. The plan had been simple. Grab the cash drawer after closing, no one hurt. The clerk surprised him. Coda was there that night, barking so hard the windows trembled. The bite came when Sutter shoved past the gate and the dog reached for what he loved. In the panic, Sutter had planted the clerk's bloodied phone in Eli's car, slipped the torn sleeve into a dumpster behind Eli's building, wrote his name where it didn't belong. He told himself the city wouldn't miss a man with priors. He told himself a lot of things. By the time the cuffs closed on Sutter's wrists, Eli had both hands flat on the table to keep them from floating away. When the state's attorney slid the dismissal across, the paper made a sound like water leaving a stone. The gate that had been an ending once became a beginning at noon on a day with no clouds. Morales walked them out herself, man and dog. There was no speech. She only scratched Coda behind the ear the way you do when you don't have the right words for the person who saved a life without language. Outside the fence, the world looked indecently ordinary. Buses grumbling by, a kid on a scooter, a woman arguing with a parking meter. Eli crouched and put his forehead against Coda's, and it struck him that the air out here had a temperature he'd forgotten how to measure. They didn't throw a party. They bought a burger, ate it in a park, and watched pigeons negotiate with the wind. Eli found a place with clean floors and a landlord who didn't ask questions after Morales made a phone call that wasn't in her job description. He bought 2 bowls, 1 blue and 1 red, and a new collar tag stamped with a single word: home. Some nights he woke up sweating, the cell walls ghosting around the bed, and Coda would lift his head and breathe against his fingers until the room was just a room again. Some mornings he walked by the river, and strangers smiled at the big, grey-muzzled shepherd and didn't know they were nodding at a detective with 4 paws and a record of being right. People said justice like it was a door with a clean hinge. Eli learned it was messier, slower, a thing that sometimes needed a dog to find its handle. If this story moved you, like and share it so it reaches someone who needs a reason to believe. Subscribe to Next Kindness for the next tale where the thing that happens after the worst is kindness.